She lives within you still, not merely as memory or absence, but as a psychic imprint etched into the deepest layers of your being. Whether she resides across the world or has long departed this life, her presence persists in the subtle architecture of your inner world. Carl Jung cautioned us about this hidden inheritance. The mother wound, a powerful and often unconscious force that shapes the contours of your choices, your self-worth, your relationships, and even your capacity for joy. It is not your mother as a person that holds you captive, but the image of her lodged within your unconscious. This archetypal mother, often distorted through pain, silence, and unmet needs, becomes the unspoken blueprint of your emotional life. And here lies the truth few dare to face. You will never fully heal until you confront the shadow of the mother within you. This is not about blame, it is about awareness. Jung understood that the mother complex, when left unexamined, exerts an invisible gravity over your soul's growth. You may think you have moved on, but until the deeper emotional patterns are brought into the light, your psyche remains entangled. The shadow mother is not the one you see in photographs. She is the one who whispers you are too much or not enough. The one who taught you love meant performance. The one whose voice still echoes in your most vulnerable moments. In this exploration, we will enter the sacred and unsettling terrain of the psyche Jung called the personal underworld. You will learn why your healing may feel blocked, how the mother complex manifests in your adult life, and the courageous steps required to reclaim your freedom. This is not a journey for the faint of heart, but it is the path of liberation your inner child has been silently waiting for. Let us begin. In the depths of Jungian psychology, the mother is not merely the one who bore you, she is a living symbol embedded in the collective unconscious, an eternal archetype whose image reaches far beyond your personal story. Carl Jung understood that the mother archetype holds a foundational position in the psychic architecture of all human beings. It is a primordial pattern that carries both the nurturing and the devouring aspects of feminine energy. She is the one who gives life, who protects and comforts, but she is also the one who suffocates, consumes, and overwhelms. Jung called this paradox the dual face of the Great Mother. And unless we become conscious of this archetype, we confuse our personal experiences with a much deeper, mythic force that silently governs our emotional reality. The personal mother, in this light, becomes the human vessel through which the archetype expresses itself. But when pain, neglect, or control are present in that vessel, the archetype fuses with trauma and forms what Jung described as the mother complex. This complex is not just memory, it is a living constellation of emotional associations, projections, and internalized beliefs that unconsciously shape the way you love, trust, seek approval, and relate to your inner world. When you idealize your mother, you may blind yourself to her shadow. When you demonize her, you may fail to recognize the deeper symbolic lessons she carried. In both extremes, you remain trapped. Jung warned that healing requires stepping beyond the ego's binary of good or bad into the symbolic realm, where the mother becomes a mirror of your own fragmented psyche. This is where the wounds of childhood continue to echo in adult relationships. You search for her approval in your partner's eyes. You fear her abandonment in every moment of intimacy. You become the caretaker, the pleaser, the one who disappears to stay safe. And yet, it is not your mother's presence that still grips you. It is the archetype within you that has never been fully seen, named, or integrated. Jung wrote that we do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. That darkness is often the shadow of the mother that we carry unknowingly, and until we meet her within, we project her onto everyone without. The mother's wound, then, is not just personal, it is ancestral. It is a psychic inheritance passed down from generation to generation, encoded not just in behaviors, but in the very structure of the soul. Your mother likely carried the unlived pain of her own mother, just as you now carry hers. Jung insisted that the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parent. And until you confront this inherited burden, you may remain entangled in a web that was never yours to weave, but became yours to untangle. To truly heal, you must return to the archetypal image of the mother, not as a person to be blamed or forgiven, but as a symbol to be honored, examined, and integrated. She is the gateway to your shadow and your soul, and facing her is not betrayal, it is initiation. It is the beginning of individuation, the sacred path of becoming whole, by turning inward, by lifting the veil of projection, and by reclaiming the lost fragments of your own essence that were entangled with hers. Only then can the inner child stop waiting for what was never given and begin building what was always possible. In the symbolic language of the psyche, the mother does not only nourish, she also devours. Carl Jung understood this paradox as the essence of the shadow mother, the dark face of the maternal archetype that haunts the unconscious long after the child has grown. Unlike the nurturing mother who holds and protects, the shadow mother controls, manipulates, and suffocates. She is not necessarily a woman, nor even a memory, but an interior force that grips the soul with subtle and persistent power. This presence is often disguised as duty, as guilt, as sacrifice. But beneath the mask lies a deeper truth. The child within has never been released. In myth and dream, she may appear as the dragon, the siren, the witch, figures who threaten, consume, or imprison. In waking life, she manifests chronic self-doubt, a haunting fear of independence, and the inner voice that whispers, "You are bad if you choose yourself." Jung warned that the shadow mother archetype cannot be bypassed. She is woven into the fabric of the maternal symbol itself. If unrecognized, she becomes a psychic jailer. Her influence is rarely overt. It seeps through in the form of unconscious beliefs and lifelong patterns. You may find yourself pulled toward relationships where you feel small, controlled, or silenced. You may self-sabotage the moment freedom or joy arrives. You may feel an overwhelming sense of betrayal simply by setting boundaries or speaking your truth. This is not a weakness. It is psychic entanglement, and it is more common than most dare to admit. Many leave their mother's house, but never leave her mind. Her judgments live on in their inner world. Her fears become the fences of their life. The most insidious weapon of the shadow mother is guilt, not the guilt born of wrongdoing, but the guilt born of separation. If I leave her, I am ungrateful. If I speak the truth, I am cruel. If I choose joy, I will betray her. Jung recognized this guilt as a psychic tether, one that binds the adult self to the mother complex, freezing development and delaying individuation. And yet, paradoxically, this confrontation is the very task required to grow. The devouring mother is not simply a menace. She is also the guardian of the threshold. Like the dragon in myth, she guards the treasure of the authentic self. To reclaim your voice, your autonomy, your creative fire, you must first face her. Not to destroy her, but to retrieve what she has guarded too long. Jung encouraged a conscious relationship with this inner figure. Through active imagination, through inner dialogue, through shadow work, the individual must meet the mother in the depths of the psyche. This meeting is not about blame, it is about truth. The mother must be seen not only as she was, but as she lives within. Her fear, her grief, her unmet needs, these must be acknowledged. But so too must the pain she caused, the suffocation, the silence, the disorientation of a child trying to become an adult while still being psychically tethered to the maternal womb. To face her is to begin the work of reclaiming your sovereignty. This confrontation is no small feat. It is a psychological death, the crumbling of the dependent self, and a rebirth into inner adulthood. The journey often involves a disintegration of old roles, emotional upheaval, and a grieving for the mother you never had, for the self that never had space to form. But on the other side is something sacred, the emergence of the authentic self, no longer imprisoned by archetypal bonds, but standing rooted in its own wholeness. Jung believed that only by confronting the mother's shadow can one truly become free, not just from her, but for oneself, for a life that is not defined by reaction or avoidance, but by the courage to live from the center of one's own being. The shadow mother, then, is not the end of your path. She is the beginning of your deeper becoming. The internal mother, in Jungian depth psychology, is not merely a memory or a personal association. She is a living psychic imprint, an autonomous force formed in the early architecture of the unconscious mind. She is born not from logic, but from the felt texture of the child's first relational environment. Through the mother's gaze, voice, consistency or lack thereof, the infant constructs an emotional blueprint of reality, a sense of what it means to be loved, to be safe, to be worthy. Over time, these emotional experiences become fused into the psyche as the mother complex, eventually crystallizing into what Jung called the mother imago. This inner image persists regardless of the biological mother's presence or absence. Even if she is no longer alive, even if decades have passed, her psychic imprint can remain lodged deep within, shaping thoughts, emotions, and behavior with uncanny precision. When the internal mother has been distorted by abandonment, intrusion, emotional inconsistency, or enmeshment, she becomes a silent dictator within the psyche. Her voice becomes the inner critic that whispers, "You are not enough. You ask for too much. You are only lovable if you betray yourself." This is no longer the external mother speaking, but a deeply internalized pattern, one that unconsciously governs how an individual views themselves, chooses relationships, navigates failure, and responds to success. Jung warned that unless this voice is made conscious, it will masquerade as the authentic self. And herein lies the tragedy. People mistake these internal assaults as truth, rather than remnants of a mother complex that was never seen for what it truly was. This internal mother, when unexamined, often compels individuals to recreate her energy in the outside world. They choose partners who mirror her emotional unavailability, or attach themselves to authority figures who evoke her judgment. They self-sabotage when they near success, experience guilt when asserting boundaries, and suppress their desires to maintain an unconscious loyalty to her image. Jung called this the paradox of loyalty and betrayal. The child clings to the mother's psychic pattern, not out of love, but out of a primal fear of psychic death, the fear that separation equals annihilation. Even when the mother was hurtful, the unconscious often equates differentiation with disconnection from the source of life itself. Healing, according to Jung, begins not by blaming the mother, but by confronting the inner structure she left behind. It requires naming the internal mother, listening to her voice, and separating her presence from the self's inner truth. It demands grief for the unmet needs and compassion for the protective strategies that once helped the child survive. As this awareness deepens, the individual can begin the sacred work of reparenting, replacing the distorted inner mother with a new internal presence that is nurturing, validating, and safe. Jung emphasized that integration includes not only confronting the shadow of the mother archetype, but also reclaiming her positive aspects: care, intuition, compassion, and the capacity to hold emotional depth. Only then can the psyche move from fragmentation to wholeness. Only then can the individual stop searching for a mother in others and become one to themselves. In the realm of Jungian psychology, separation from the mother complex is not merely a personal decision or a social rite of passage. It is a symbolic rupture, an archetypal act of liberation through which the soul begins to shed inherited illusions and step into its own authority. Carl Jung taught that psychological separation is not born from rebellion or rejection, but from the sacred need to individuate, to become whole, to emerge as a sovereign ego distinct from the gravitational pull of the mother imago. Without this inner separation, The boundaries between self and archetype remain blurred, and the ego remains trapped in a psychic orbit, repeating childhood patterns under the guise of adult autonomy. The cost of this entanglement is invisible but immense: the forfeiture of inner freedom, the paralysis of decision-making, the silencing of the soul's deeper voice. Separation is not abandonment. It is birth. Just as biological birth severs the umbilical cord, psychological birth severs the unconscious fusion with the maternal psychic matrix. But the ego does not step forward without resistance. The inherited guilt that arises in this process can feel primal, as though to choose oneself is to betray the very source of life. Jung observed that many individuals unconsciously cling to this guilt as a form of ancestral loyalty, remaining stuck in patterns of self-betrayal, shrinking, and spiritual dormancy. The soul fears the emptiness that comes when the mother complex dissolves, and so it clings to what is known, even when the known is toxic. This is the paradox Jung named: the psyche prefers familiar suffering to unfamiliar freedom. The mother complex can masquerade as safety, but its unseen cost is stagnation. True separation often feels like death before it feels like freedom. The child within, conditioned to seek approval, to please, to defer, must symbolically die for the adult self to emerge. This death is not clean. It is marked by grief, disorientation, guilt, and often a collapse of identity. But this unraveling is sacred, for it is through this threshold of inner death that the sovereign ego is born. Not an ego inflated by pride or rebellion, but one anchored in inner truth, capable of standing alone without fear. Jung compared this to the archetypal hero's journey: a leaving of the maternal world, an encounter with dragons and shadows, and a return transformed, not as the child who left, but as the self who sees. This spiritual separation is not a denial of the mother's humanity, but a release from her psychic dominion. It allows the adult to finally say, "I am no longer a child in hiding. I am here and I am whole." When this sovereign ego emerges, the individual no longer seeks salvation in parental figures, no longer apologizes for existing. They begin to live from within. They begin to create, not in reaction, but in alignment. Jung understood this as the first real step into adult consciousness. It is the foundation for true relationships, true creativity, and true spirituality. And though the path to separation is narrow, lined with shadow and sorrow, its destination is luminous: the birth of a self who belongs not to a past, but to a purpose. In Jungian depth psychology, the unhealed mother wound does not merely linger as memory. It carves itself into the structure of the psyche and, left unexamined, manifests not only as emotional dissonance, but as a quiet architecture of suffering that infiltrates thought, body, and relationship. Carl Jung often warned that what remains buried in the unconscious will not stay silent. It will instead shape our fate from within. Nowhere is this more vividly seen than in the symptoms that arise when the maternal complex has not been confronted, integrated, or released. The inner critic, that relentless voice whispering inadequacy, is not merely a habit of thought. It is the echo of the internalized mother wound. Beneath it lies the child's unmet need to be seen, held, and affirmed. This inner saboteur punishes ambition, silences expression, and sows chronic self-doubt. Jung recognized this voice not as reason, but as shadow, the disowned maternal figure haunting the ego from within. The same is true of the fear of freedom. To the adult psyche with an unhealed mother wound, autonomy can feel dangerous. Growth feels like betrayal. Success, even joy, becomes tinged with guilt. There is an unconscious loyalty to the suffering mother image, as though thriving will abandon her all over again. Jung saw this psychic guilt as an archetypal inheritance, binding the child's self to a loyalty that was never consciously chosen. So the adult hesitates, self-abandons, shrinks. Many live entire lives obeying this hidden script. They please others, suppress their needs, and find comfort in relationships that mirror the early maternal bond, however painful. This repetition is not accidental. The psyche, Jung said, seeks resolution by recreating the wound externally. In this loop, the partner becomes mother, the workplace becomes the old family system, and the soul remains hostage to a wound misrecognized as destiny. Even the body begins to speak what the mouth has forgotten. Psychosomatic illnesses, chronic fatigue, disordered eating, and autoimmune reactions often reflect the internal war between the silent self and the inherited voice of the mother complex. Jung believed these bodily signals were not failures of biology, but the cries of the unconscious demanding recognition. At a deeper level still lies a spiritual vacuum. The archetypal mother represents not only the human mother, but the primordial source of life, meaning, and connection to the collective unconscious. When this connection is severed, the soul experiences a profound alienation. The individual may wander through life untethered, spiritually hungry, and unable to connect with the feminine principle within. This is not just emotional pain, it is metaphysical exile. Jung taught that the remedy is not found in blaming the mother, nor in bypassing her, but in illuminating the mother image that lives within. The work is to see the projection for what it is, to dissolve the inner critic, to reclaim the rejected child, and to step back into sacred alignment with the authentic self. These symptoms are not signs of weakness, they are invitations. Beneath each one is the echo of a soul asking to be seen. To heal the mother wound is to make the unconscious conscious. It is to re-enter the hidden chambers of the psyche where the child still waits, not for the mother, but for the self to come home. In the sacred architecture of Jungian depth psychology, the encounter with the shadow mother is not a step, but a threshold. It marks the soul's passage from unconscious loyalty to conscious liberation. Jung did not treat this confrontation as a therapeutic suggestion. He regarded it as an initiation, an alchemical ordeal through which the psyche must pass if it is to evolve beyond the inherited patterns of pain. Healing the mother wound is not achieved through analysis alone. It requires a symbolic, bodily, and emotional descent into the underworld of the maternal shadow. It is not an idea to be understood, but a darkness to be entered. This descent is what alchemists called the nigredo, the blackening. It is the death phase of the old identity, where the false self, shaped by the mother's unmet needs and distorted projections, begins to dissolve. Here, the shadow mother appears not as a memory of a woman, but as a psychic force. She is the devourer, the manipulator, the seducer of the ego, back into helplessness and guilt. And yet, Jung taught that what devours us also contains our salvation. The shadow holds the very vitality we abandoned in order to be loved. It is through this painful confrontation that the scattered fragments of the self begin to return home. But we must first see her clearly. The shadow mother is not merely cruel. She is afraid of her own unlived life, of being forgotten, of being rendered powerless. She clings to the child not out of love, but out of unconscious terror. To see this requires that we give up the fantasy of the perfect mother. Only then can we step out of the child's role and meet her not with hatred, but with presence. The rage that follows is holy, the grief sacred. Jung insisted that repressed emotion becomes toxic when left unseen, but when expressed, through writing, ritual, dreams, or active imagination, it becomes a bridge to integration. In this inner dialogue, the ego begins to mature. The shadow mother is met not with compliance, but with truth. Through this symbolic act, the old psychic hierarchy collapses. The internal tyrant loses her throne. This is not a comfortable process. The death of the idealized mother often brings despair, night terrors, and disorientation. But this collapse is not pathology, it is initiation. It is the moment the hero faces the devouring dragon, not to destroy it, but to retrieve what it guards, the soul's freedom. And in this retrieval comes the return of the feminine, The mother wound often causes us to exile our sensitivity, our intuition, our receptivity. These traits feel dangerous, weak, or shameful. But in embracing the shadow, we reclaim these lost aspects. We begin to feel without apologizing. We create without fear. We nurture without needing permission. This reclamation is a restoration of the inner feminine, which Jung saw as the soul's compass. To mark this passage, ritual becomes essential. Jung recognized that the unconscious responds deeply to symbolic acts. Writing a letter to the shadow mother and burning it, creating art that honors both pain and rebirth. Lighting a candle for the child that still waits within, declaring one's inner sovereignty aloud. These rituals do not end the journey, but they signal to the unconscious that the old allegiance has ended and a new phase has begun. Eventually, through this deep work, something unexpected emerges: compassion. Not the conditioned, guilt-laden pity, but true compassion rooted in clarity. We begin to see the mother as human, flawed, wounded, shaped by her own unlived story. This does not mean we condone harm, it means we no longer let her shadow define our own. Jung called this the beginning of healing, the transformation of inherited fate into conscious life. This is the task before us: to see her, to face her, to free ourselves not from the mother, but from the complex that has kept her alive within us. And in doing so, we reclaim what she unknowingly withheld: our wholeness. This is not the end of the journey, but the beginning of a deeper homecoming, the sacred return of the adult self, the integration of the mother's light and shadow, the liberation of the feminine within, and the freedom to love from a place no longer bound by need, but illuminated by soul. In Jungian depth psychology, forgiveness is not the summit of healing, but a mist that may rise after the inner landscape has been reshaped by fire. Carl Jung understood that the soul does not mend itself through forced absolution or moral performance, but through the fierce and quiet reclamation of truth. The healing of the mother wound begins not with the command to forgive, but with the descent into the wound itself. It begins in the shadows, in the broken places we have avoided, where grief stagnates and rage has turned to stone. Forgiveness, if it arrives, does not come as a loud declaration, but as a whisper after the storm. A byproduct of integration, not its goal. Jung warned us of the great danger of premature forgiveness. When forgiveness is prescribed by religious doctrine, family pressure, or spiritual bypassing, it often acts as a veil covering unspoken grief and unprocessed anger. Many are told that forgiveness makes them mature, evolved, or holy. But Jung saw this as a kind of psychological betrayal, a silencing of the very emotions that must be seen, felt, and honored in order for true healing to unfold. In such cases, forgiveness becomes another mask of the mother complex, another attempt to be the good child, to avoid abandonment, to escape the guilt of daring to speak the unspeakable. Before the soul can even consider forgiveness, it must first reclaim the parts of itself that were denied, silenced, or severed in childhood. The voice that was told it was too much, the anger that was labeled dangerous, the sadness that was never soothed, the truth that was too heavy to carry. This reclamation is not a condemnation of the mother, but an emancipation of the self from her psychic dominion. It is the adult returning for the inner child and saying, with unwavering love, "You were right to feel what you felt. You deserved more." Jung emphasized that healing begins when the mother is no longer viewed through the distorted lenses of idealization or demonization. Only when she is seen clearly as a human being, complex, wounded, and fallible, can the projections that once endowed her with godlike power begin to dissolve. And with that dissolution, the individual stands at the threshold of true sovereignty. It is from this grounded clarity that forgiveness may quietly arise, not as an obligation, but as a choice born from compassion, no longer entangled in guilt, fear, or unmet longing. Yet Jung was adamant: forgiveness is not a requirement. What is required is integration. What is sacred is the return of the disowned parts of the psyche. The inner child must be retrieved, the internalized mother unseated, the ego reborn. The goal is not to reconcile with the outer mother, but to end the war within. It is not to erase the past, but to reclaim the self from it. To declare without apology that your life belongs to you now. Final reflection for Part 7. Jung wrote, "Only the man who can consciously assent to the power of the shadow within himself can overcome it." In the terrain of the mother wound, this means we do not wait for forgiveness to set us free. We awaken, we integrate, and we rise, not to please, not to prove, not to perform, but to live, fully and fiercely, in the sovereignty of our own being. Inner freedom is not given, it is chosen, and it begins the moment we stop waiting for permission to be whole. In the language of Jungian depth psychology, healing the mother wound is not the conclusion of a chapter, but the initiation of a new myth, the rebirth of the authentic self. It is the sacred crossing from psychic inheritance into inner authorship, from unconscious repetition into conscious creation. Jung taught that this passage requires not merely reflection, but transformation. It demands the symbolic death of the false self, the version of you shaped by survival, sacrifice, silence, and guilt. As you begin to unravel the complex web of loyalty to the mother image, both personal and archetypal, you step into the alchemical fire of Nigredo, where the ego's old architecture dissolves into fertile darkness. This disintegration, though disorienting, is the prelude to psychological metamorphosis. What once felt like an identity crisis is in truth the unraveling of a self that was never truly yours. Values collapse, desires vanish, the ground beneath you softens. Yet it is in this sacred unmooring that the deeper self, the sovereign self, begins to stir. No longer defined by the need to earn love, play roles, or meet unspoken maternal expectations, the self emerges as a quiet center of gravity within. It guides not by fear, but by resonance, not by duty, but by inner knowing. It does not ask, "What does she want from me?" but rather, "What is true for me now?" This rebirth involves rewriting the internal narrative you once inherited. The haunting myths of "I must earn my worth" or "my voice is too much" begin to fade. In their place, new stories rise, ones that speak of wholeness, of emotional depth, of inner wisdom gained through suffering and reclaimed through awareness. Jung believed this reauthoring of the self is not only psychological, but mythological. It is the moment you step out of the ancestral spell and begin living a story that is truly your own. From this sacred new ground, boundaries are no longer reactive defenses. They become expressions of self-respect and protection for the adult self. You begin to recognize the ghost of the internal mother when she reappears in moments of guilt, shame, or regression. You do not banish her, but you do not obey her either. You learn to listen, to witness, and to choose differently. This is the essence of individuation, not to destroy the inner mother, but to rise beyond her as your own inner authority. The shift from seeking external mothering to becoming your own inner mother is one of the most profound transformations Jung identified. You become the one who soothes your fear, validates your longing, and honors your sensitivity without apology. You no longer chase worth through others, you embody it. And in doing so, you reunite with the sacred feminine principle, not as an abstract ideal, but as a living pulse within your body and psyche. When the mother complex is integrated, your creativity returns as an offering, not a plea. Life begins to flow not from pressure, but from presence. This is the sign of psychic fertility, the moment the dam breaks and the soul creates not out of fear of rejection, but from the joy of expression. Jung called this the flowering of individuation, when the inner marriage of shadow and light, of past and possibility, bears the fruit of authenticity. And then, without forcing, you return to the world, not to seek healing, but to offer it, not to relive your story, but to embody the wisdom it gave you. Relationships shift from reenactment to reciprocity. Work becomes service, not performance. Presence becomes your gift. But perhaps the most powerful gift of all is that you break the ancestral spell. You become the one who stops the inheritance of unconscious pain. You become the conscious ancestor, the one who dared to feel what others suppressed, to speak what others silenced, to heal what others passed on. This, Jung said, is the true act of redemption. Not to save the mother, but to redeem the self, and in doing so, become a vessel of wholeness for those yet to come. Final reflection for Part 8. Rebirth is not a return to innocence, but a courageous step into sovereignty. It is the moment you stop editing your truth to fit the mold your mother handed you. It is the day you become the mother your soul always needed. As Jung wrote, your vision will become clear only when you look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. In the ashes of the mother wound, your awakening is this. You are no longer the child seeking to be chosen. You are the self, choosing yourself. And the pen is finally in your hand. Write wisely. Write wildly. Write for free. If this message stirred something inside you, don't stop here. The next video will take you even deeper into the journey of healing, growth, and self-discovery. It might just be the breakthrough your soul has been waiting for. Tap into it now. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and join a community committed to truth, transformation, and real inner change. You're not alone on this path. I'll meet you in the next video, where we continue becoming who we were always meant to be.